Am I the bleep bleep for defying my HOA and going too far? I'm a 35F, and I've lived in my neighborhood for about 2 years now. When I first moved in, I thought I'd found my forever home. The streets were lined with cute, well-kept houses. People smiled and waved, and sure, there was an HOA, but how bad could it really be? What I didn't realize at the time was that I'd purchased my house on the cheaper side, well below the market price for the area. The seller had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that the previous owner had some disagreements with the HOA, but I didn't care. I figured that was just typical house selling drama, and honestly, I thought the previous owner was probably the one causing the trouble. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. Fast forward to today, and I'm officially the black sheep of the neighborhood. The majority of the street avoids me, while only a handful of neighbors secretly sympathize with me. But let me tell you, getting here has been anything but easy. When I bought my house, I genuinely believed I'd hit the jackpot. The location was ideal, the house had good bones, and the neighborhood seemed like the perfect mix of peaceful and social. I imagined summer BBQs with friendly neighbors, holiday decorating contests, and a general sense of community. Now, I'm not naive. I knew HOAs had rules, and honestly, I thought that was a good thing. Nobody wants to live next to a house painted neon green or a yard filled with rusty car parts, right? I figured as long as I mowed my lawn and followed the basics, I'd stay under the radar. For the first year, that was true. I was a model resident, dues paid on time, lawn trimmed, trash bins tucked away like clockwork. I barely even noticed the HOA. Fast forward to this past summer. After a long, stressful week at work, I realized how much I wanted an outdoor space to relax and unwind. My backyard was decent, but it was missing something. That's when the idea hit me, a pergola. I spent weeks researching designs, picking out materials, and envisioning a cozy little nook I'd create. Before doing anything, I checked the HOA's rules. They said I needed to submit plans for approval, which I did. Easy enough, right? Wrong. Weeks passed with no response. I followed up politely and was told my application was under review. Another month went by, still nothing. At this point, I was frustrated. It was just a simple backyard pergola, not some massive construction project. So, I decided to take the plunge and build it. Big mistake. 2 days after the pergola was finished, I got a letter from the HOA. They claimed I had violated the rules by starting construction without approval, fined me $500, and demanded I tear it down immediately. I was stunned. I called to explain that I had submitted the paperwork weeks ago and followed up multiple times, but the response I got was infuriating. Rules are rules. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a full-blown declaration of war. At first, I considered caving. $500 was steep, and the idea of tearing down something I'd just built made my stomach turn, but I didn't want to be labeled a troublemaker. Then I started hearing stories from my neighbors, and let me tell you, most were firmly on the HOA's side. One neighbor told me how the HOA had helped her by keeping the neighborhood looking pristine. She said that the HOA's rules on exterior appearance and lawn maintenance made the whole street look so much more appealing, and that it was worth the occasional fine. Another neighbor proudly told me how the HOA had helped him keep his property value high. He was always impressed by how the board's decisions kept the area from going downhill. He even bragged about how the HOA had cut down on those rowdy renters who didn't take care of their lawns. One of the oldest residents, who had lived in the neighborhood for decades, said, "The HOA has always been good to us. It keeps things running smoothly. Why rock the boat?" I felt like I was the only one who saw this as a problem. Still, I couldn't back down now. Fueled by righteous indignation, I decided to fight back. I started by digging into the HOA's bylaws, and let me tell you, What I found was shocking. It turned out the president had been selectively enforcing rules and even inventing new ones without proper board approval. For example, there were no actual rules about trash can visibility, yet several neighbors had been fined for it. I also discovered that many of the violations people were being fined for were never formally written into the bylaws. The president had been making things up as she went along. Armed with this information, I started talking to the few neighbors who seemed to be on my side. One elderly neighbor told me how the HOA had been unnecessarily harsh on her and had tried to fine her for not cutting her bushes to their approved size. She explained that she'd been fighting the HOA for years, but most people in the neighborhood just accepted the rules. I also spoke with a younger couple, 30s, who felt the same way. They mentioned how the HOA had fined them over trivial things, like the color of their mailbox, but most of the neighborhood didn't seem to care. Unfortunately, most of my neighbors were steadfast in their support of the HOA. They all argued that it kept the neighborhood looking nice and maintained property values, so I was quickly becoming the neighborhood troublemaker in their eyes. The president didn't take kindly to my little crusade. Suddenly, I became her favorite target. I started getting notices for ridiculous things. My grass was half an inch too long. My mailbox wasn't the correct shade of white. My driveway had excessive cracks. It was clear she was retaliating, but I wasn't about to back down. After my pergola incident, the HOA president decided to take things to the next level. Instead of just sending more fines, she called a special HOA meeting specifically to address the issue of my alleged violations. I knew right away what this meeting was about. It wasn't about solving anything. It was about punishing me. The atmosphere felt hostile the moment I stepped into the room. Everyone was there, and I could already feel the tension in the air. The HOA president was sitting at the front, a smug smile plastered on her face, as if she already knew how the meeting would go. I tried to keep my cool as I made my case, listing off the bylaws, the research I had done, and the unfair treatment I'd received. But it was clear the deck was stacked against me. One by one, neighbors who had previously been cordial started turning on me. The HOA had created an us versus them mentality, and I was firmly on the them side. The president didn't even let me finish before she started firing back with accusations. She claimed I was trying to undermine the HOA's authority, that I had disrespected the community, and that my actions had set a bad example for everyone else. It felt like a public trial where the outcome had already been decided. Then came the vote. I had been hoping for even one ally in the room, someone who saw the injustice, but instead, the entire neighborhood seemed to have rallied behind the president. Every single one of them sided with the HOA. There were no questions, no concerns raised about how the rules were being enforced. They all just wanted the conflict to end. And then, as if to make a final statement, the president declared my pergola a public nuisance and imposed another $500 fine for construction without approval. I left that meeting feeling completely defeated. I thought for sure that standing up for my rights, pointing out the flaws in the HOA's actions, would earn me some respect. But it didn't. The neighbors were now completely alienated, and I was seen as the one disrupting the peace. But I wasn't about to let this go without making some kind of statement. In that moment, I felt like I had nothing left to lose. The system had broken me, and I was ready to break the rules in return. The next day, I went outside to my pergola. I grabbed a bright red spray paint can, and in huge, bold letters, sprayed across the side, HOA is a dictatorship. I stood there for a moment, looking at the message I had just created. It felt cathartic. It felt like I had finally done something to fight back, even if it was reckless. Then, I didn't stop there. I made a few more signs and went to other houses in the neighborhood. I posted them in yards where the neighbors had been vocal against me. The signs read, HOA, where your voice doesn't matter. You deserve better than this. Stand up. Fight back against HOA tyranny. It was crazy. It was impulsive. And looking back, it was the most outrageous thing I'd done. But in that moment, I felt like I had to make people see. I couldn't just accept the status quo. The next morning, the neighborhood exploded. I woke up to a flood of angry messages from neighbors who had found the graffiti and signs. They were furious. Some even called me a nuisance, a troublemaker, and worse. The HOA president immediately sent me a letter demanding I remove the spray paint and signs, threatening further fines for defacing public property. At that point, I knew there was no going back. I'd become the neighborhood villain. The president called another emergency meeting to deal with my disruptive behavior, and I wasn't invited this time. The worst part? The neighbors weren't even mad about the HOA's rules or the fines anymore. They were mad at me for causing a scene. A few people said they understood why I was upset, but most of them just wanted to move on and return to normal. I tried to apologize to a few people, but the damage had been done. The HOA had won, and I was the one who had torn everything apart. The neighborhood no longer felt like home. People wouldn't talk to me in the street. I was the outcast. So, Reddit, am I the bleep bleep for causing all this chaos after the HOA used the meeting to punish me? I know my actions were extreme, but was I right to fight back like I did? Or should I have just accepted it and moved on?